Sure, here's the beginning of your HFY, humanity. Fuck yeah. Story titled Top HFY Stories. They conquered the spirit of war in the jungle. They dropped into the jungle under a blood-red sky, the air thick with moisture and the scent of decay. This world, Jatari Prime, had swallowed entire platoons whole. No one came back, not intact. Anyway, the locals called it the Green Inferno. To the Galactic Council, it was a lost cause, but to humanity, it was a challenge. Captain Marin Voss adjusted her visor, scanning the dense undergrowth as her squad fanned out behind her. The terrain was hell. The enemy was worse. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting something older, something primal. The THRYNN called it the spirit of war, not a myth, but a sentient force bound to the jungle, feeding on conflict, growing stronger with every battle. It learns, whispered Corporal Tarek, eyes darting. It remembers. Voss nodded. So do we. Humanity didn't come with superior numbers or advanced tech. They came with strategy, stubbornness, and a talent for war that bordered on artistry. Where others fell to chaos, humans adapted. They used guerrilla tactics, built traps from vines and mud, and learned the rhythms of the jungle like an old song. They stopped trying to beat the spirit of war head-on. Instead, they taught it fear. By the 5th week, the spirit lashed out less. It avoided their patrols. It recoiled from their fire. And then, on the 42nd day, it did something no one expected. It spoke. You do not fight like the others. It growled through the rustling trees. You become part of the jungle. Voss raised her weapon but didn't fire. We don't fight to destroy, she said. We fight to survive, to win, and we don't stop until we do. There was silence, and then, a shift. The jungle eased. The air cleared. They didn't defeat the spirit of war. They conquered it, not with brute force, but with grit, cunning, and human willpower. That's why this mission is remembered, not because they survived. Because humanity tamed war itself. Want to expand it into a full short story or turn it into a series? Absolutely. Here's Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Echoes of the First Flame. The jungle was quiet now, but quiet didn't mean empty. A year had passed since the pact. Jatari Prime had become a forbidden world, off limits to colonists, scientists, and warmongers alike. But for those who knew, it was more than that. It was sacred ground. Commander Voss had returned, not with weapons, but with a delegation. Diplomats, scholars, priests, even a sculptor. All of them hand-picked, all of them skeptical. You're telling me a war spirit made peace? The diplomat scoffed as they descended in the shuttle. Voss didn't answer. She just stared out the window as the canopy broke below them, revealing the lush green wounds of an ancient battlefield, now overgrown with vines, flowers, and silence. They landed in the grove. The marker was still there. The vines hadn't touched it. The spirit kept its word. And then, without a word or signal, it appeared. Not a form this time, not a mimicry of human memory. It came as fire. A slow-burning flame that hovered in the air, flickering between orange and deep violet, casting shadows that danced with stories no one spoke aloud. The scholars fell silent. The diplomat stepped back. But Voss stepped forward. You remember me, she said, not a question. The flame pulsed once. I've brought others. They want to understand what you are. Another pulse, then a flicker, a wave of heat that painted images in the air, flickering. Ghostly scenes. A battle between the THRYNN and the early settlers. The moment Voss's unit stood their ground instead of firing. The spirit splitting itself into pieces to end a war thousands of years ago. A single burning tree, still alive, its roots connected to every death the planet had ever known. The diplomat fell to her knees. The priest wept. The sculptor pulled out his tools and began sketching furiously. For the first time, the galaxy saw war not just as a tool or curse, but as something alive, something that could be reasoned with, something that could be healed. The spirit wasn't a monster, it was a survivor. Just like them. And in that shared truth, humanity found its most powerful legacy, not domination, not conquest, but understanding. Want Chapter 4 to dive into how this changes the galaxy's politics or spark a movement among other war-torn worlds? Glad you're into it. Here's Chapter 4. Chapter 4, The War Speaker Accords. Word spread like wildfire across the stars. A jungle that had once devoured armies was now a place of peace, not because it had been conquered, but because it had been heard. A war spirit, ancient and untamed, had spoken, and humanity had listened. For some species, it was terrifying. For others, it was hope. Within months, a summit was called, not on Earth, not on any core world, but on Jatari Prime. The spirit agreed to host it, not through speech or emissaries, but through presence, flame, memory, echoes. The summit became known as the War Speaker Accords. Species that had never met outside of battlefields sent their elders, their warriors, their scarred veterans. Voss returned as an honored guest, not a general, not a politician, but as the first listener. No weapons were allowed within the grove. Those who brought them found their guns jammed, their knives rusted. The spirit's rules were clear. One by one, the species spoke, not of victories, but of losses. The Zolari told of their civil wars that shattered 5 homeworlds. The Parn gave voice to their generational trauma, entire lifespans spent at war, never knowing peace. Even the Viereth, who had once tried to glass Jatari Prime, stood in silence, letting the spirit show them what it had endured. When it was humanity's turn, Voss said only this: war lives in us, but so does the choice to end it. The spirit flared bright. It hovered in the air between them, casting images of possible futures, one of burning stars and endless conquest, and another, a fragile, luminous path, of unity forged through shared scars. That was the day the accords were signed. Not as treaties of power, but as promises of memory. Every world that joined would build a war speaker shrine, a place to remember not just their victories, but their regrets. Humanity wasn't feared anymore. They were respected. Not because they were the deadliest, but because they were the first to look war in the eye and ask it why. Should Chapter 5 dive into a rebellion against the Accords? Maybe a faction that sees the spirit as a threat to war-based empires? Absolutely. Let's turn up the tension in Chapter 5. Chapter 5, Embers of Resistance. For every world that embraced the Accords, there were 2 more that resented them. To the warlords of the core dominion, peace was weakness. To the arms guilds of the Meridian clusters, war was profit. And to the iron faith of Tal, it was divine. They called the Accords heresy. And they called the spirit a liar. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into plans. Ships were refitted, mercenaries hired. An old human name resurfaced, General Luther Gray, a decorated tactician turned war profiteer, dishonorably discharged after opposing Voss's jungle mission. Gray didn't believe in spirits, he believed in leverage. And Jatari Prime? That was leverage waiting to be seized. Meanwhile, on Jatari Prime, the spirit pulsed with unease. It didn't speak in words, but those attuned to it, like Voss, like the monks who now lived in the grove, felt the warning. The jungle stirred, the vines tightened, the flame burned low and blue. The balance is tipping, Voss whispered to her second, a former THRYNN named Sova. Sova hissed softly, what happens if it breaks? Voss looked toward the grove, where the spirit's light barely flickered. It remembers war, she said, but if forced to fight again, it might become it. Across the stars, Gray launched his campaign. He called his fleet the Ember Fist. 12 warships, elite ground units, shock troopers, not to destroy the spirit but to capture it. His plan was brutal and elegant: disable the jungle with engineered toxins, disrupt the spirit's energy matrix, and imprison its core for study, for power. We tame it. We win every war for 1,000 years, Gray told his investors. It's not a god, it's a weapon. But what Gray didn't understand was this. The spirit had been tamed once. It would not let it happen again. As the Ember Fist arrived in orbit, the stars dimmed. The spirit flared red for the first time since the Accords. Voss stood at the grove's edge, her hand on her old rifle, not to attack, but to warn. To plead. Don't make us forget what we've learned, she said to the flame. But deep in the roots of Jatari Prime, the jungle shifted. And the spirit whispered one word into every listening mind. Prepare. Shall we jump into Chapter 6, Firefall, where the invasion begins and humanity must decide, do they defend the spirit, or unleash it? Let's go. Here's Chapter 6, Firefall. Chapter 6, Firefall. The Ember Fist descended like a storm. 12 warships broke through orbit, their hulls bristling with toxin tanks and energy nets. Bombers raced ahead, releasing clouds of engineered defoliants designed to strip the jungle bare, kill the roots, weaken the spirit. It should have worked. But it didn't. The first bomber never made it past the atmosphere. It burst into flame without warning, consumed not by missiles, but by a reaction from the planet itself. Lightning from a clear sky, wind that cut through armor, trees that moved. The jungle fought back. Voss stood in the grove as the spirit raged. It wasn't a flame anymore, it was a maelstrom, red and gold, spiraling, howling with the fury of 10,000 wars. You have to calm it, Sova shouted, crouching beside her. It's breaking the pact. Voss didn't answer. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't just the spirit. This was every memory it held, every soldier who'd died screaming, every innocent crushed beneath steel, every whispered prayer before the end. It wasn't breaking the pact. It was remembering why it made it in the first place. And why it might have to end it. In orbit, General Gray grinned. Perfect, he muttered, watching the sensor spikes. Now we know it can fight, just need to push a little harder. He turned to his strike team. Gear up, we land at the grove. Voss called for help. Not from Earth, not from the Council. From the Accords. Encrypted signals went out to every world that had listened, every race that had spoken to the spirit. It was the shortest message ever sent under the war speaker flag. The spirit burns, come or we all fall. And they came. From Zolari moons to Viereth spires, they mobilized. Not fleets, not weapons. Veterans. They came in drop pods and broken freighters, soldiers, monks, exiles, peacekeepers, those who had known war, those who had survived it. They weren't here to fight. They were here to remind. As Gray's forces landed, clashing with the jungle's fury, something shifted, all across Jatari Prime. The veterans lit signal fires, small, humble flames, one by one, 1,000 across the planet. Each one a memory. Each one a witness. The spirit paused. It saw them. And in that moment, Voss stood and faced the storm of flame. Remember who you are, she said, not what they made you. The spirit screamed. And then, it chose. Shall we head into Chapter 7, the Judgment Flame? The moment the spirit delivers its final verdict, on Gray, on humanity, and on the future of war itself? Absolutely. Here's Chapter 7, the Judgment Flame. Chapter 7, the Judgment Flame. The battlefield was silent. No gunfire, no screams, just the eerie stillness that comes before something ancient moves. Gray stood at the grove's edge, flanked by his elite guard. His armor gleamed, his confidence was iron. The spirit hovered before him, no longer flame, now a figure, tall and wreathed in smoke and gold, its shape shifting with every breath. Its voice, when it came, was not a sound, it was felt, in bones, in blood, in memory. You come to take, as so many before. Gray raised his weapon. I came to contain you, for the good of the galaxy. Containment, the spirit echoed, is not peace, it is a cage, and cages breed rage. He sneered, you're a threat. So are you. And with that, the jungle reacted, not with violence, but with vision. Gray screamed as the spirit touched his mind. He saw the wars he'd profited from. The villages burned in his name. The children he'd left orphaned. The soldiers he'd abandoned. And then he saw something worse, a galaxy where no one feared war anymore, where war became a tool, a game, a currency, and in that galaxy, the spirit burned endlessly, because no one tried to understand it. He dropped to his knees, shaking, weapon forgotten. I was trying to control it. War is not meant to be controlled, the spirit said, it is meant to be understood, and remembered. Around the grove, the veterans lit their final fires. And the spirit wept, a sound like falling ash, soft and heavy, not of defeat, but of release. It turned to Voss one last time. You listened, you learned, so I give you this. From its burning core, the spirit reached out, not in wrath, but in peace, A single ember floated into Voss's hand. A living memory. A seed. Plant this on any world that forgets. It will remind them. Then the spirit turned to gray. And it did not kill him. It left him, alive, but burdened. Every life he'd taken now echoed in his bones. He would feel each one, dream of each scream, wake with each name on his tongue. A punishment not of death, but of remembrance. Jatari Prime quieted again. The jungle breathed. The war was over. Epilogue. Years later, the embers of the spirit would be planted on war-torn planets across the galaxy. Shrines would grow, not of conquest, but of truth. And humanity's legacy would not be of domination. It would be this. They faced war. They listened to it. And they made it listen back. Want to add an epilogue following Gray's fate? Or explore a new spirit awakening on another world? Let's close this arc with a reflective epilogue, The Man Who Couldn't Sleep. Epilogue, The Man Who Couldn't Sleep. The world they left him on had no name. Just coordinates buried in forgotten files, marked for isolation and silence. No visitors, no transmissions, no way off. Gray lived in a hollowed-out husk of a ship, surrounded by jungle, not Jatari Prime, but a world not unlike it. The kind of place where the wind always whispered just a little too loud, like it remembered something you'd rather forget. And Gray remembered everything. He remembered each soldier sent to die under his command. Each civilian marked as acceptable loss. Each planet scarred by his ambition. At first, he tried to scream them away. Then he tried pills, silence, prayer. But every night, the spirit returned, not as flame, not even as voice, just presence, like a ghost sitting at the edge of his cot, whispering memories in time with his heartbeat. He began to write. Not to make peace, but to confess. Pages turned into journals, journals into crates, a lifetime of truths, etched in ink and madness. And one day, decades later, someone found them. A young explorer, lost and desperate, stumbled onto the ruin and found the writings. They were meant as warnings. They became scripture. The galaxy eventually forgot Gray's crimes. But they read his words. And they learned. Final line, etched into the last page. If you try to own war, it will own you. But if you listen to it, truly listen, it might just set you free. Want to start a new story set in the same universe? Maybe with another spirit awakening on a forgotten moon? Or a rogue group trying to twist the Ember's memory for power? Let's dive into a new arc set in the same universe. Here's the start of a new story. New series, Embers of Memory. Chapter 1, Ash Moon Rising. Decades after the Warspeaker Accords changed the galaxy, peace had become expected. Too expected. On the mining moon Viral 6, orbiting a dead world with no name, peace was a rumor. Corporations ran the mines, mercs kept order, and the people? They just tried to survive the shift. Until the digging hit something it shouldn't have. It wasn't metal. It wasn't stone. It was warm. Miners called it the pulse rock at first, a strange, smooth surface that hummed when touched and burned through drills like butter. At night, it glowed faintly, amber and red, like dying coals. And then came the dreams. Whispers of old battles, visions of planets burning, names no one knew written in languages no one spoke. The first death was a foreman, heart stopped, eyes wide, mouth locked open like he'd seen the end of everything. Then more followed. People started calling it what the veterans feared. Another spirit. But this one wasn't born in a jungle. It was buried in ash. And it wasn't waiting to be found. It was waking up. Want to keep going into Chapter 2, The Grave That Remembers? This one's shaping up darker, more mystery, more psychological twists. Absolutely. Here's Chapter 2, The Grave That Remembers. Chapter 2, The Grave That Remembers. The miners sealed off Shaft 7 after the third death. Didn't stop the hum. Didn't stop the dreams. Every night, more of them heard it, marching boots in vacuum, steel grinding on bone, stars crying out as they burned. Not just dreams, memories. But whose? Elsewhere, on a drifting war relic near the edge of the dead zone. A small ship docked. Inside was a woman named Kessa Voss, yes, that Voss. Not a soldier, not a legend, Her granddaughter. She was no warrior, no peacekeeper, just a memory historian, wandering the outer colonies with nothing but an old data slate and a head full of second-hand ghosts. The ping had hit her console 2 days prior, a faint signature, buried beneath encrypted debris logs from the old Ember Fist campaign. A familiar pattern pulsing from Viral 6. It matched the Jatari Prime Ember. But the rhythm was different. Slower, angrier, older. She rerouted her course immediately. Back on Viral 6. The corporate security forces had installed plasma barriers over Shaft 7. They called it quarantine, but no one could explain why birds, native to a terraforming accident 80 years ago, started flying into walls at full speed. Or why workers began reciting war chants from extinct civilizations in their sleep. Then one worker, young, barely 20, walked into the mine in silence. No suit. No gear. Just eyes wide open and whispering one phrase over and over. I remember the fire. I remember the fire. I remember. He reached the pulse rock. Touched it. And vanished. Not exploded. Not vaporized. Just gone. Like memory itself had swallowed him. Kessa landed 2 hours later. She wore no armor, just a coat stitched with old metals, and a necklace, a single ember from Jatari Prime, still warm after all these years. She stepped out, breathed the dry ash air, and whispered, "So, you're not the only one after all." She didn't come to fight the spirit. She came to ask it one question. What do you remember that we don't? Shall we dive into Chapter 3, The Names the Ash Kept? That's when things get real weird. Time fractures. Ghosts start walking. The spirit shows Kessa something humanity was never meant to know. Let's go deeper. Here's Chapter 3, The Names the Ash Kept. Chapter 3, The Names the Ash Kept. The shaft was cold. Too cold for a moon whose core still churned with geothermal heat. Kessa descended alone, passing warning signs, flickering lights, and the scorched outline of the last man to touch the pulse rock. The deeper she went, the louder it became, not a hum, now, but a chant. Hundreds of voices, thousands, layered like echoes carved into stone. She reached the end of the shaft. And there it was. The rock wasn't a rock. It was a coffin. And it was cracked. As she stepped closer, her ember pendant pulsed once, then burst into ash. The memory from Jatari Prime was erased in an instant, consumed by something older, darker. The coffin opened slightly. A sliver of red light shone from within, casting shapes on the walls. Kessa saw them. A human soldier kneeling before an alien queen. A Viereth war priest stabbing his own eyes out before battle. A weapon that didn't kill flesh, but erased names from time itself. And then, she saw herself, but not here, not now. Running. Bleeding. Carrying a name in her hand like a flame. "You shouldn't be here," said a voice behind her. She spun. An old man stood in the shadows, mining uniform, face weathered, but his eyes were wrong, too deep, too full, like they'd seen galaxies die. He handed her a data chip. "I tried to bury it," he said, "but memory doesn't rot." "What is it?" Kessa asked. He turned to the coffin. "The last war the galaxy forgot, and the name of the one who started it." Kessa narrowed her eyes. "Who?" The man looked at her with infinite sadness. "You did." And then he disappeared, not walked, not faded, vanished, like a name spoken for the last time. The coffin split open. And something stepped out, not fire, not jungle, not rage. A figure made of dust and memory. And it knew her. Want to head into Chapter 4, Memory War, where the spirit begins to rewrite reality itself, and Kessa has to choose between remembering the truth, or protecting the galaxy from it? Here we go, Chapter 4, Memory War. Chapter 4, Memory War. It didn't have eyes. But it looked at her. The figure from the coffin, tall, hollow, wrapped in drifting ash, walked without sound. Every step it took left memories in the air. Echoes of screams, faded laughter, entire lives flickering in and out of existence like dying stars. It spoke without moving its mouth. "You are the last name I remember." Kessa backed away, hands trembling. "What are you?" "I am the war that was erased." The figure turned. its voice now filling the entire shaft. Before the Accords, before Jatari, there was a conflict so devastating. The galaxy agreed on one impossible act, forgetting it. Kessa's heart pounded. She'd read about time lock anomalies, reality edits, even the forbidden tech once buried in Viereth vaults. But this was the source. They buried me here, wrapped me in silence, but memory leaks, it always leaks. The figure stepped closer. And now, you've remembered enough to break the seal. Above ground, Viral 6 was already changing. People forgot their own names mid-sentence. Machines ran instructions from decades ago. A baby was born speaking a language no one had heard since the Second Galactic Collapse. And far off in deep space, other embers stirred. The spirit of Jatari Prime flared once, and dimmed. Because it remembered what this one was. Not a spirit of war, but a spirit of amnesia. Back underground, the ash figure reached out and touched Kessa's forehead. Suddenly, she saw it all. The galaxy burning before the galaxy was born. Species that no longer existed, not because they died, but because no one remembered they ever lived. Herself, in another life, leading the charge to erase the war. She wasn't just a historian. She was its executioner. The leader of the unremembering. And the cost of that peace? Every soul who fought in that war, every truth, buried alive in this coffin of ash. Kessa dropped to her knees, screaming. Why me? The spirit knelt beside her. Because memory is coming back, and when it does, war returns with it. Final line. You have one choice, Kessa Voss, remind the galaxy why it forgot, or let it all burn again. Next, Chapter 5, The Unremembered Return, where fragments of the erased war begin to manifest across the stars, and Kessa must hunt down the other architects of the Great Forgetting, before memory becomes a weapon again. Ready? Let's dive into it. Chapter 5, The Unremembered Return. Chapter 5, The Unremembered Return. The stars flickered. Not with light, but with doubt. Across the galaxy, things were appearing where they shouldn't. Monuments no one remembered building. Wreckage of ships that didn't exist in any archive. Entire moon colonies blinking into existence, half finished, half rotted, like a dream half remembered. And people were starting to ask dangerous questions. Why does my grandfather remember a war I've never heard of? Why do I dream in symbols I've never seen? Why does the core of Viral 6 show a war date, before time started counting? Kessa left the ash moon behind. Not as a historian. As a witness. She carried with her a single fragment, a name etched into bone metal, Ansel Thorne. One of the original unrememberers. A name scrubbed from every database, every language, every neural net, and now it had returned, burned into her skin like a brand. Her mission was clear. Find the others. The ones who made the choice with her. The ones who helped bury a war so terrible, its existence was a threat. Because now, they were waking up too. Elsewhere, in the Trinary reaches, a derelict ship called the Solace Unfound powered on for the first time in 300 years. Its logs were corrupted. Its crew was long dead. But a man stood at the helm, hair white, uniform from no known fleet, eyes bleeding data. He whispered to himself. Kessa remembers. And then, to the ship. Begin reassembly of the memory engine. The war isn't over, it just forgot itself. Back with Kessa. She docked at the ruins of the archive world, Velos 9. Burned during the Emberfist campaigns, it had become a graveyard for knowledge. She walked through the ash of lost history, following echoes no one else could hear. Then, in the deepest vault, she found it. A sealed chamber labeled in 3 dead tongues. Inside, 7 coffins. 6 were sealed. 1 was open. And inside the open coffin was a suit of armor, black as the void, etched with names that flickered and died as you read them. A plaque beneath it read, "Here lies Ansel Thorne, until we forget again." Kessa stared. Because the coffin was empty. Final line. And across the stars, people began waking with names on their lips, names they'd never heard, but couldn't stop saying. The unremembered were returning. And they were angry. Shall we hit Chapter 6, The Engine Beneath Time next? That's where things get cosmic, memory tech, forgotten AI war gods. and the horrifying reveal of what the war was really about.